Let's continue on with our discussion of terrorism. One of the basic tenets of terrorism is captured in this phrase: terrorism is theater. What is meant by that? Well, as you can see in this first statement, unlike other ordinary crimes, terrorism is meant to be seen. So there's a public aspect of terrorism. If a terrorism attack goes unnoticed, it's a failure. The terrorists want their actions to be seen. Now, it may not be necessarily that they want the whole world to see it, but they have a specific audience. It could be the whole world. It could just be a specific group. But they want their violence, their threats of violence, they want their property damage, whatever it may be, they want it to be observed, and they want a message to be sent. So terrorism, you can view it in a strange way, as a form of communication. And so we use this phrase, terrorism is theater, to denote that. What's included in that phrase is that terrorists rely on certain techniques to get their message across. So here I have them listed, some of them. You could probably find more, but I have these ones listed. Staging is important. What we mean by that is when the terrorist thinks about what target to attack, that terrorist is going to consider different elements about that target's significance. Does it have symbolic significance? So we can see symbolism listed here. Was it just an accident that the Al-Qaeda attackers on 9/11 hit the Pentagon, the World Trade Center towers, and attempted to hit the Capitol? No, it was no accident. They were considering a grain silo in Iowa instead of those locations. They knew that if they were able to actually successfully attack those locations, they would capture a lot of attention. But in other situations, maybe terrorists don't want to cause mass fear and distress. So maybe they're only hitting a particular target because they only want to really affect a particular audience. So instead of the 9/11 attacks, which were meant to send a message to the whole world, maybe your concern is more limited. You only want to send a message to abortion doctors. So you only attack an abortion clinic. But you want that message to get out to the abortion doctors that, hey, there's some group out there that's violent, that is willing to use murder or other forms of violence to discourage abortions. So staging the attack, how do you carry it out? How do you get your maximum benefit from this attack? How do you actually effectively send your message to your audience? So staging is important, thinking about how you're going to carry out the attack. Is it going to be a bombing? Is it going to be a shooting? What is it going to be? When is it going to occur? What's the location? All these kinds of things are very important. Symbolism is part of that. Again, is this some kind of target that has special significance to the group you're trying to communicate with? You're trying to intimidate. So maybe it's a special religious shrine. So you're carrying out an attack against that particular location, or maybe it's a particular individual. So this is the leader of some movement, and you're going to assassinate that person. So again, the symbolism could involve the dates. Is this an important date? Is this Hitler's birthday and you're a neo-Nazi group? Is this an anniversary of a particular battle that took place, and you want to honor your ancestors who fought in that battle, and you want to send a message to the people who they defeated, but maybe who are in charge in today's society. So you attack on that particular day. Things like that. The media is a consideration. How are you going to get media attention? Now, obviously, with the internet, you can produce things yourself. You can do as ISIS has done and behead people and publish those videos on the internet. But obviously, if you want to have worldwide impact, you want to involve the major news networks as well. Not just social media, not just the internet, but also CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC, BBC, all the various news agencies. So how can you attract media attention? Force maximization refers to designing your attack in such a way that it makes it look like you're more powerful than you actually are. it's likely that Al-Qaeda could only carry out one 9/11 type of attack in its history. And so they wanted that attack to have lasting significance far beyond 9/11. So again, they could have bombed a grain silo out in Iowa and nobody would have noticed it. Or they can attack the World Trade Center in New York and everybody would remember it. And so force maximization is carrying out your attack so that it makes it look like your terrorist group is much more powerful than it is, that they could attack you at any time, any place, you're always in danger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that probably isn't the truth. So it's kind of like a cat that gets backed into a corner and it puffs up really big to make its attacker run away and be scared. Terrorists are essentially trying to do the same thing. And we can see this even with their names. Rarely are they going to call themselves two guys who hate the government. Now, they're going to instead refer to themselves, even if they are just two guys from Bellefonte, they're going to refer to themselves as the Center County Liberation Front or something like that. So even their names are meant to make them look more powerful. Finally, the audience reaction. They're going to consider when they're crafting this particular attack what the audience's reaction will be. Some groups want the audience to believe we can wipe out the world at any given time. Other groups are more limited. For instance, the Irish Republican Army in Northern Ireland. They wanted to scare the British, but they didn't want to offend their supporters in Northern Ireland. So they would often, when they bombed a location, they would often call ahead so that the local citizenry, the people who maybe were at that bar or at that store or whatever it was that they were bombing, could get out. They would send an advance word. The IRA even apologized for one particular bombing that went wrong when they killed some people that they didn't want to kill. And they actually sent out an apology saying, we're sorry, this was a mistake, we didn't mean to kill these people. So that may sound strange, the terrorists apologized, but they wanted a particular reaction. They wanted to affect one group, but not the other. Finally, terrorism is asynchronous war, which means that it's a battle between two groups that don't have an equal amount of military power and resources. So ISIS can't carry out a sustained conventional war against the United States or other Western powers on the battlefield. But they can use terrorism to cause problems for those countries. And so we're going to see more and more of this kind of warfare because, as we said in the last presentation, there aren't too many superpowers left in the world anymore. We have a couple, and if other groups actually want to bring about change, terrorism is probably a better tool than some kind of conventional war. Basic terrorism facts. As I just said, terrorism is likely to become more, not less common. So it's going to be a part of our world. It sounds cliched, but we just have to learn that terrorism will be part of the modern world because of the considerations that I just went over. The fact that there is an imbalance in power, military power, that media makes it easier to carry out terrorist attacks and get messages across, all these kinds of things. But it still is true that the odds of an American civilian, we're not talking about soldiers who are in Iraq or Afghanistan or some other place that is a danger zone, a combat zone, that the odds of an American civilian being injured or killed by a terrorist attack is extremely low. You can see here these numbers between 2001 and 2014. Around 3,400 American civilians were killed in the U.S. or abroad. And nearly 3,000 of those 3,400 were killed in just one day's attack, the 9/11 attacks. So if you exclude 9/11, which is obviously a very important incident, but if you exclude it, we're talking about around 400, 500 people who were killed over the course of 13 years. In that same time period, about 140,000 people were killed just in the United States in drunk driving incidents. So you may be worried about that terrorist attack that's occurring in the United States, but the truth is that drunk driver is much more of a threat to you and your life than those terrorists. So this isn't to say that we should ignore the threat of terrorism, but again, we need to realize how much of a threat terrorism actually is, because by realizing it and realizing that the terrorists aren't likely to be able to cause uh, absolute devastation and combating terror. And there's an old terrorist once said, and this is repeated often, and I'm paraphrasing it here, terrorists only have to succeed once. The government has to succeed every time. So, in other words, we can stop 99 out of 100 terrorist attacks and think that we're successful, but the public probably won't if we fail one time. So if we thwart 99 attacks, but one terrorist attack is successful, it makes the government look bad. It makes the government look weak. The public needs to realize that we've stopped the great majority. So the terrorist, in order to be considered successful, really only have to succeed once out of 100 times. The authorities, they have to be right every time. What are ways that we can better combat terror? Certainly intelligence. Intelligence is comprised of data and analysis, so we need better means to collect information, but not just to collect it through electronic surveillance, through CIA agents and other intelligence agents on the ground in foreign countries gathering information, but we also need to analyze it. What does this data mean? In 9/11, before 9/11, we had information. We had the data that people were going to flight simulators to learn how to fly, but they didn't want to land or take off. Was that meaningful? Eventually, the FBI said, no, it wasn't. Some agents thought it was. As it worked its way up through the FBI bureaucracy, eventually someone said, no, we don't think it's worth following up. Obviously, it was worth following up because those individuals went on to become the hijackers on 9/11. But we get thousands upon thousands of, even millions of pieces of information, and we need good ways to analyze it. Diplomacy. Certainly diplomacy can work in the war on terror. Can we make those countries where terrorists are likely to come from, can we make them more democratic? Can we increase the rights of the people so that more and more people in that country actually feel like they have freedom to perhaps speak, to practice their religion, to do whatever they want to do, to have a happy life? That may sound, real simplistic, but it is important. Spread democracy. Offer incentives to countries to de-radicalize. So reward countries for helping us to fight the war on terror. Don't just always use the stick to beat them when they do something wrong, but also give them rewards, even if it's just slight improvement. Encourage them to keep on improving. Use the military when necessary, but really use it as a last resort. Use it only when it's really necessary. Don't overuse it, because then it looks like we're being repressive and we're just taking over the country rather than assisting the country if we're in another country. Target hardening. That means making potential targets more difficult to hit. So if it's the White House, we make it more difficult to drive. It's impossible to, unless you're authorized to drive a car up Pennsylvania Avenue so that you could plant a truck bomb in front of the White House. It's just not going to happen. We have fences up around. We've seen some weaknesses because we've seen some drone attacks, and even some people, not drone attacks, but some drones get over those fences, and even people. But we can harden targets by making it more difficult, putting security devices up to detect guns and bombs and other kinds of weapons, these kinds of things. And finally, respect law and liberty. So don't give up all civil liberties in the name of combating terror. Really try to capitalize on those freedoms and sell freedom as your best defense against terror. Finally, educate the public and encourage accurate media reporting. A better educated public will better respond to the threat of terror, and better media will better report.